What's up, everyone? Sergeant Argybright here again. And today we'll be watching Part 3 of the Operation Barbarossa series by Potential History. The Reigns of Typhoon. By that, probably gonna talk about Operation Typhoon. Something like that. But it seems weird because they ended last time at the end of the middle. So I don't know why they would be talking. Maybe they'll just have it at the end. Maybe they'll start talking about Operation Typhoon at the end. Those of you who don't know, Operation Typhoon was the German attack on to try to encircle Moscow, pretty much, with this like pincer movement thingy. And also, I tried to record 2 videos yesterday because I kind of felt guilty for not, recording. I mean, for the few days that I didn't record. Yeah, that's because I had to go somewhere, but the Wi-Fi disconnected, and that keeps happening. So, yeah, I'm just doing it today. It's very annoying when that happens. Breaking news. Live breaking news.
Hello and welcome to Veldt Creek News, your source for good news.
Okay, I don't know if I critiqued this map in the background in my last video, or the video that I tried to record but the Wi-Fi went out. This map is awful. Czechoslovakia was not a country. Czechia right here. I'm pretty sure Sudetenland is part of Germany in this map, but I don't know. Czechia was a occupied puppet of Germany, and Slovakia was also a puppet of Germany, but I don't think it was occupied by Germany. This part of Czechoslovakia, Carpathia, Ruthenia, or whatever, is part of Hungary, and so is southern Slovakia, since that area is like ethnically Hungarian. And then general government and occupied puppet state of Germany again. And yeah. And Austria was part of Germany. I do not like this map.
The German summer offensive continues into fall and now winter, even though it was supposed to be over months ago, with troops reaching the outskirts of Moscow. For more, we go to our man in the field, Griffin, to see what's going on with the troops. Griffin, how's the situation out there? Is it good?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the armchair historian, I think. Is it? Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Are the troops continuing to make advances?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's cold out here.
Okay. Do we know if we're... Guys, he froze to death. Do you have anybody else out there? Alright. Well, that's all the information we have for now. Apparently it's going just fine. But tonight at 10, a preview of the new morning show, Reich and Shine, with Herr Yoker.
Reich and Shine.
This video is sponsored by through Operation Barbarossa. And if you haven't, I encourage you to watch the previous 2 videos, as this one will build off a lot of what was said. But for a very...
I agree. You should also watch my past 2 reactions if you haven't yet of this series.
Quick recap, here's the armchair historian detailing the first month or so and the issues the Germans were running into.
Hey, Potential History. So after exacting
No.
revenge on old enemies from the First World War, Hitler turned his sights to the east. According to Hitler's worldview, the USSR was the product of an international Jewish conspiracy. Eliminating the Soviet Union would allow him to not only eradicate communism and replace the Eastern Slavs with the German folk, but also to topple Jewish dominance across the continent, thereby solidifying Aryan supremacy in Europe. Yeah, it's quite crazy and based almost entirely on unfounded pseudoscience, but this was his motivation for waging war.
Just stop here, can I continue?
Hitler's general staff was pretty much universally behind the idea, as they believed such an endeavor would be effortless. Their reasoning was that Russia had practically defeated itself in the first...
Oh my gosh! Stop! You didn't. That's not the only motivation. Germany needed resources, or its economy was gonna collapse, as I said earlier in my other videos. Why is this not listed as a reason? I don't understand. Why? 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 Think about this. If Germany really wanted, I mean, they did. But if that was their only motivation to have Aryan supremacy, by the way, Aryan has nothing to do with like Northern Europeans. It has to do with like people in Iran. So I don't understand why people say that. Not even the Nazis said Aryan. I don't like. Where did that come from? Anyway, if that was their only motivation, it would have made more sense for them to wait after the war, after they defeated Britain first. Like, come on, guys. And by the way, never mind. I think I made my point.
First World War, and the regime that rose in the aftermath was ostensibly even less competent than the one before it.
Yeah, whenever you look at it that way, I guess it makes sense that Russia wouldn't be that powerful. But then you have to remember that the Russian Empire literally went through a civil war.
Proven in the humiliating campaigns waged in both Poland and Finland in the interwar years.
I thought they did good against Poland. Oh my gosh, look at those casualties. Wow, that is awful.
After witnessing such blunders from across the border, the Germans fabricated a plan which was hinged on the Red Army capitulating after just 3 months. Without much delay, the Wehrmacht began preparing 3 army groups for attack. The only officers who had doubts were those in the Supply Corps, probably the first people I would check with before launching the largest invasion in history. They predicted that if the invasion exceeded 3 months, the German military would not have enough supplies to keep its momentum, which wasn't really the most ideal when winning the war was predicated on waging a lightning war. However, the invasion would still go on. Hitler knew he could defeat his supposed subhuman enemies within this time frame. He launched the attack in late June 1941 with a lot of initial success.
They would have been able to launch it sooner if Italy had not done so bad against Greece. Seriously, I think Greece took like a huge chunk of Albania before Germany was able to help Italy push back Greece.
Caught in a period of transition,
Yeah, that put them back like a few weeks.
Red Army had a very hard time finding its footing against the German advance. But in September, the 3rd month of the invasion, the first halt predicted by the German supply officers took place. And although on paper the Soviet Union should have fallen by then, millions of Red Army troops still lay ahead.
Yeah, the Red Army, they had a lot of reserves. But, what's interesting is that you always hear how they have all these reserves. Like I said in the, top 7 Red Army myths. Like 1944, they were actually starting to scrape the barrel. Like they were running out of, they were starting to run out of manpower.
Ready to fight and die for their motherland. If you want to know more about why the first year went so poorly for the Red Army, head on over to my channel after you watch this video, where I'm covering the reasons that Stalin had so much trouble in the early days of the invasion.
Thank you, Griffin. On July 16th,
Oh, yeah, and because, Stalin was basically oblivious about what was happening. He was willfully ignorant. He had been warned a lot of times by his own commanders and Churchill, but he didn't listen. And also, whenever Germany started bombing the Soviet cities initially, Stalin did nothing.
the city of Smolensk
Because he didn't want to provoke them.
fell to Army Group Center, which was of great significance to the Germans as it was the second major objective on the chopping block and was predicted to be the point at which organized enemy resistance would begin to fail completely. The only problem was this didn't happen. The complete encirclement of troops in the area and the ending of the battle itself still had a few more weeks to go, but the Germans had, in a very short time, driven deep into the Soviet Union and destroyed large portions of the Red Army. The generals assumed, once that Smolensk had been captured, it would be followed by a continued drive to Moscow to win the war. However, on July 19th, Hitler drops kind of a and it's
Oh no, I accidentally paused it.
On July 19th, Hitler drops kind of a bombshell in the form of Directive 33 and its supplement. I'll have the full text of this below, but it basically says that Leningrad and Kiev need to be taken before the drive to Moscow, and that the two panzer groups within Army Group Center will be diverted north and south to help accomplish these objectives before moving on to the Soviet capital.
Well, that makes sense, to cover their flanks.
This event has come to be known as Guderian's Southern Turn, and has come to be viewed by some as the moment in which the Germans forfeited their chance to take Moscow and win the war. Cited by historians and German generals themselves as a huge mistake, and one of the many ways in which Hitler single-handedly caused them to lose the war. It's all Adolf Hitler.
Are you kidding me? I can't even comprehend that people would think that way. Jesus Christ. What the hell, guys? Okay. First of all, taking Moscow does not equal winning the war. Okay? Stalin isn't gonna be like, okay, you took Moscow, good job, here's all my land. There you go, you can puppet our country there. No! Stalin doesn't care, he's a dictator. He owns the country. He's not gonna let it surrender until, think about what happened with Nazi Germany. Hitler wasn't going to... Hitler himself didn't surrender. He killed himself before he ever surrendered. And even when Berlin was taken, and 90% of their country was occupied, Germany still kept fighting. Who's to say that won't happen with the Soviet Union? Soviets will fight past the Urals. It doesn't matter, they'll fight into Siberia. Because they're just like that. That's how dictatorships are. The dictators are selfish. They don't care about the nation. They care more about themselves and their own personal interests. Oh yeah. And also, what the heck? Their flanks aren't covered. Imagine how the winter counterattack would have been, because that happened in real life. The winter counterattack. Imagine how that would have been, except when the whole flank is exposed. All of Army Group Center's flank is exposed to the enemy. Imagine that. It could have been like another Stalingrad. It could have literally been just like Stalingrad, where they get encircled, and then the Soviets just annihilate them. That is probably what would have happened in that scenario. And also, are you kidding me? Why would you trust the German generals? Of course they're going to lie. They're going to blame it on Hitler. Why would they blame it on themselves? It makes sense. Why would they blame it on themselves when they have a scapegoat? Because then they're just yeah.
However, this was probably not as dumb as it has since been viewed.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. Okay, I thought he was saying it.
South, the Red Army held a huge salient around Kiev with 800,000 troops in it. The Army Group South had been unable so far to encircle and destroy or even really push back. And if Army Group Center had moved forward towards Moscow without it being destroyed, they ran the risk of sticking their neck out too far and having their head cut off.
Exactly.
The second and less often cited point in support of the diversion is that in the original Barbarossa plan, it was always the idea that Army Group North and Army Group South would support each other on the wings, i.e. one group would not move forward until the other had completed its timetable objectives, and that they would call upon each other for assistance in doing this if needed. So if Army Group North had not captured Leningrad and secured Army Group Center's flank for their advance on Moscow, it was always planned that the units on the wings of Army Group Center would be diverted to help. Given the situation in the south, I think it only makes sense that this assistance would be passed on to Army Group South as well, because Army Group Center would be the ones suffering if they don't take Kiev and shore up the flank before their move to Moscow. Regardless of how sound the logic, the generals did not agree with this strategy and fought Hitler tooth and nail for the duration of the Smolensk engagement. Hitler, however, stuck to his guns until the completion of the encirclement of Smolensk on July 27th, with 100,000 Soviet prisoners taken, and doubles down on July 30th with Directive 34, further outlining the flanks needing to be secured, a general halt for Army Group Center with infantry formations only making small advances, and a broad outline for resuming Army Group Center's movement once the flanks are taken care of. The generals make another plea against this in a meeting with Hitler on August 4th, but he refuses to budge. On August 5th, the Battle of Smolensk ends with 300,000 Soviets taken prisoner, followed by some Red Army counterattacks with little to no effect. Then finally, in late August, the panzer divisions are turned to the flanks, and the dreaded southern turn begins. Now, a lot has been said about the specifics of what happened in the attacks of Kiev and Leningrad, so I'll spare the details, but the most important bits are that Hitler just...
I mean, the South, that has plenty of good resources too, you know, food. They definitely needed food. The German people and the people they were occupying were literally starving.
...decides to siege Leningrad instead of...
And of course all the other Axis powers.
...taking it so Army Group North can keep moving eastwards. And Kiev is taken, resulting in 500,000 Red Army POWs. Army Group Center during this period...
Wait, I thought it was 600,000 though.
...is moving so little it's not really worth mentioning, and the front commanders are really frustrated about that. Early in this part of the campaign, on September 6th, Hitler hands down Directive 35, laying out what the general plans for Operation Typhoon, the assault on Moscow, are going to be, saying that it must happen as soon as possible, ideally at the end of September, and ordering elements of Army Group North and South to support Army Group Center in the approaches to Moscow, going as far as to suggest the merging of panzer divisions to rebuild Army Group Center's strength, really highlighting the heavy losses talked about in Episode 2, and how that is really an ongoing problem. On September 30th, Operation Typhoon begins, seeing the Panzer Group's return and Army Group Center's first significant movement since July, and their troops very quickly pick up where they left off, encircling multiple Soviet fronts around Vyazma, prompting Otto Dietrich, the equivalent of the German press secretary, to state to the international press, quote, "The campaign in the East has been decided. With these last tremendous blows we have inflicted on the Soviet Union, she is militarily finished." Which, given what you see on the map, may seem true, but to the... She is militarily finished. Which, given what you...
That map is from 1942, right before Fall Blow. And it's not in 19... Never mind. But yeah, that's a map from 1942. I don't know why they're showing that.
See on the map may seem true, but to the troops on the front, this is utterly bewildering. The Germans have been seeing heavy losses ever since Barbarossa began. 30,000 at Smolensk, 26,000 at Kiev, 62,000 eventually in October itself. All from an enemy who just doesn't seem to die. By German counts, the Red Army should have been destroyed a few times over by now. But every time they encircle one army group, there are two more right behind it. And these are the trained reservists the German intelligence completely missed in the planning of the campaign.
Yeah. Like I said in another episode, there was one German guy who said, wait a minute, maybe there's 100 divisions behind the lines, behind the Soviet divisions. But in reality, it was more like 500 or something like that. It was maybe not 500, but it was a lot. It was definitely in the hundreds.
The Soviet Union was supposed to have collapsed a month ago. And even after this great victory at Vyazma, there's still enemy troops ahead of them with no indication that they plan to give up. And German units are really being heavily worn down. On top of this, the weather is about to make a turn for the worse. The Russian rainy season began in October, making the roads unusable, causing a halt on October 25th of the drive to Moscow that would not resume again until November 15th, when the ground froze after temperatures plummeted. The worn-out German columns continue to advance, though, with some forward units reaching the Moscow suburbs, claiming they can see the Kremlin in the distance. Now, a lot is made of this, that the Germans were right there as they get closer and closer in late November and into December. And the maps make it look like that, but the troops that get within sight of the Kremlin are the furthest forward units, not the bulk of the army, as is somewhat suggested when you often see this fact pointed out. In fact, the German army that reaches Moscow is really a shadow of its former self.
Like, if you really looked at it, just on, like, there's such a huge difference between looking at something on a map and the actual picture of what's happening. Like, for example, if you look at if you look at a map of World War I in 1918, right before the Central Powers capitulate, it looks like they're winning. Like, it looks like they're the ones that are winning, not the Entente. But, you know, maps like that, they're misleading because they don't take into account so many things.
Although they've been very successful in the amount of ground they've taken, the panzer groups especially have been hit hard. And it's due to this growing divide between the troops on the ground and commanders in the rear as to what's going on. German troops have been at this for months. They're exhausted. Their units are low strength, and the supply problems mentioned in the previous videos are really giving them trouble. And it's becoming more and more difficult to continue going forward at any rate. We often talk about later in the war, German commanders moving around divisions on the map that are only divisions in name. But this is already happening during Operation Barbarossa.
Really?
Multiple halts of Army Group Center have given the Red Army time to call up reserve troops and set up a very dense defense zone around Moscow. But the exhausted Germans, now freezing to death, have been unable to penetrate. Even
what was that?
Moscow. But the exhausted Germans, now freezing to death,
what were they doing?
Have been unable to penetrate. Even with the plan having been switched from assaulting Moscow to encircling Moscow, the German army just can't move anymore. And it's beginning to be hit hard by Soviet counterattacks.
No, go
As
away.
the generals continue to push forward, the German army is being put into a worse and worse position until on December 8th, Hitler issues Directive 39, abandoning the offensive and most likely saving Army Group Center from destruction. It's usually said that the Germans were stopped at Moscow, as if they just
saved them from destruction. Jeez.
Called it a day, and there was no real big deal about it. But Army Group Center was at serious risk of being destroyed by Soviet counteroffensives if it hadn't have dug in to repel them. And this is evident by how much they're pushed back from December to January. And the small encirclements of Soviet counterattacking armies that the Germans were able to accomplish in this period were only really possible from their being on a defensive footing, being able to absorb the punch in certain areas so that counterattacks could be made to cut them off. Lance goes as far as to say that if the Red Army hadn't overextended itself in these counterattacks, exposing itself to these encirclements, that Army Group Center may have been surrounded and destroyed. And I mention all of this because a lot of people say that Hitler calling off the advance was a mistake, and that had he not done that, Moscow would have been surrounded. But I think a lot of that is the result of not understanding the real dire straits Germany is in at this point, and that they probably couldn't have gone much further even if they wanted to, and the assault wasn't called off.
Also, you hear a lot about how they should have just retreated. How Army Group Center should have just retreated to some sort of defensive line. Sorry, that's my cat. He's on top of me right now. But I don't really agree with that. It would, like, one of the main things is it would have given the Soviets a lot of morale, and it would have decreased German morale a lot. Like, they told the world, yeah, we're about to defeat them. Just like they said earlier in the international news. So, for them to retreat, that would just make them look horrible. That would make them look really bad, and that would decrease morale for the Axis and increase morale for their opponents. And then there's the argument that the line that the Soviets, the amount of land that the Soviets took during the counterattack was the same amount that Army Group Center wanted to retreat in the first place. But that's just how much they wanted to retreat. Who's to say that the Soviets aren't going to attack past that line after they retreat?
Now, the war is still far from over, and the Germans would perform 2 more major offensives in the east before it was, but Barbarossa is very significant in that this was Germany's only real chance to win it, if they did have a chance to win it. Throughout Barbarossa, the Germans had air superiority, with the exception of certain times in the Battle of Moscow. They have numerical superiority on the ground, most importantly when they make this final drive to Moscow, and they have the supplies to allow all 3 army groups to be moving at once. These 3 things the Germans will not have all together at once for a significant portion of time ever again. I'm not a big fan of turning points.
That is true. Wow.
I've said this before. I think wars are too complicated to point at one specific event and say that's where it all changed, especially something as big as the war in the East. But if I had to pick one, it'd be the Battle of Moscow. Because the things that people point to as Germany's if-only disadvantages that are the only things keeping them from winning in later campaigns aren't present here. They have numerical superiority. They have the initiative, being the ones attacking for the past months. And the things that are holding them back, such as weather and the losses from attrition, the Soviets are having to deal with just as much. The Germans have the upper hand here in all these instances, and they can't pull it off. Which leads me to my final point, one that kind of nullifies all of it. That final point being, was taking Moscow, or not being able to, really the thing that kept them from winning? Or was taking Moscow something that wouldn't have really had a change to the outcome or really won it for them?
Yeah, it wouldn't have done anything. Napoleon took Moscow and nothing happened.
Commanders and a lot of people post-war put a lot of emphasis on if only Moscow was taken, then they would have won. But I'm not too sure if that's the case. Moscow did have big railway hubs around it, and it was the, capital, is where the government sat. And with other countries like France, once the capital was taken, it's pretty much over. But when the Germans began the war, they made it very clear that the Soviets were going to die one way or another, that surrender meant death, with things like the Barbarossa Decree and the Commissar Order. Basically, the Soviets had 2 options: die under occupation or die fighting. And
that is true. That's a good point. And the Germans, they wanted to exterminate the Slavs and sort of replace them with the German people. So I don't think the Soviets would want that.
Just because Moscow's gone, I don't think they're going to pick the die under occupation option. Sure, it would have been a huge setback in, a large industrial area and railroad hub, as I said before, but the Germans had lost Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev, Leningrad had been cut off. These are all very important cities, and in 1942, you're going to almost see the Volga cut and Stalingrad taken completely. And then surrender's not sloshing around in their minds either. Basically, the Soviets are taking hit after hit to their economy and ability to wage war, and they're still fighting back because they know that ultimate outcome. What happens if they surrender? They know the German intentions. So because of that, I'm under the belief that as long as Stalin is alive, and as long as they have area to retreat back to, they're not going to give in. They're not just going to hand Germans the victory.
100% agree.
The Germans are going to have to push them all the way back to Siberia. And as we've seen, the German offensive power is just gone now. And they're at the furthest point they're ever going to get. Soviet counterattacks are going to pummel Army Group Center, and although there are other attacks later, other summer offensives, they aren't moving across all 3 army groups ever again. 1942 is just Army Group South, and then 1943 is part of Army Group Center and part of Army Group South. They can't even move a whole army group anymore. They have to combine their resources. So would Moscow...
Exactly, because they don't have any resources at all. I think Fall Blau in 1942, the summer offensive, that... No! Clips, I'm sorry. Back, okay. My cat got scared. Anyway, I think, that offensive in 1942, when they try to take the Caucasus, it's probably their best opportunity. But of course, Halder messed it up and kind of ruined it for Germany. And yeah, if they would have had that, they would have had all the oil they would have needed and all these other resources that they desperately needed. And the Soviets would not have those resources. The Caucasus had a lot of the oil. I think they had like half of all of the Soviet oil. in that one place. If Germany had that, that would have been great. I don't remember if it's half or 90%. It's one of those two. But it's a lot of oil that Germany really needed. But even then, Germany could have still lost. So, even though there's still like a huge chance Germany would have lost, that would have been their best chance of winning. Even though it's not like huge or anything.
Helped, yes, but I'm not too sure if it's the win. And that's something I've covered in other videos. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring.
Well, that's the video. Thank you all for watching. I really enjoyed making this video. That was a very interesting series. Oh yeah, we have another episode. Okay, well, Operation Barbarossa, episode 4, Reflection. That should be interesting. Anyways, like and subscribe, and have a good day.